Thanks for everyone joining live and folks who are going to watch this recorded later on. We wanted to kick off what I hope will be an informational webinar series on our Pivotal CF platform that we brought into general availability in November of last year after an exciting 2.5 years of R&D on the project. Pivotal CF is based on the open source project Cloud Foundry. And we wanted to take today's time to focus on how we're seeing a real trend in the market around delivery transformation in terms of software in large enterprises, and highlight a couple of the features that we think of a modern approach to platform as a service that really enable enterprises to compete in a way that they never could before with startups that are now threatening their incumbency. So we're going to review why enterprises need a PaaS today more than ever, and why now is the critical time in 2014 to begin planning rollout, deployment, and architecture for that. We're going to talk a little bit about how Pivotal CF fulfills the promise of an enterprise platform as a service, and already we've seen very strong momentum and market acceptance of Pivotal CF, and highlight a few things there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the essential features through a demo from James Baer of what makes Pivotal CF the leading enterprise PaaS. The high order bit, when I talk to customers and enterprises and I get 15 or 20 senior executives in an EBC room here at Pivotal, and I have the real pleasure and privilege of their time, the thing that I like to talk about more than any given product feature is really the changing dynamics of our economy and how more than ever software really is eating the world. This is a fundamental transformation that we haven't seen for a long time in IT, and I think one of the most poignant examples of this is a man named Paul Graham, who was funded early in the mid-2000s a small incubator called Y Combinator. And his thesis was, what if I take 4 to 6 very talented engineers, give them what was then an emerging cloud platform on Amazon, and allow them to iterate very quickly? How could they disrupt and build new businesses? And I think Paul's wisdom in this regard was that he measured their progress every week. And by measuring these companies every week and challenging them to iterate on a faster cycle and to behave in a very agile way without a lot of bureaucracy, they've done some amazing things. And right now, Y Combinator companies, even though they start off as these tiny little 4-person ventures, have created $13.7 billion in market cap, almost entirely based on web-style software. I think that's remarkable. And really, when you take a step back, the accrued change from this is that software is changing industries in a way that it never has before. And it's not so much in the old division in the early boom days of there are now internet companies and regular companies. It is truly that software is changing almost all industries. And I was really touched by the acquisition of Nest this week for $3.2 billion by Google. And I was happening to have a conversation that same day with some customers from an industrial manufacturing company. And I think they realized that Nest's combination of industrial firmware with interactive software tuned to an experience on both a mobile and a web platform was really game-changing and something they had to respond to. And that's different from in earlier generations of the web where maybe travel was going to be disrupted, maybe book selling was going to be disrupted. It's almost everywhere you look. One of the other things that's very interesting is when you talk with some of the large banks and they say to you, hey, we spent $1.5 billion a year last year on software development. How is it that Square didn't come from us? Why wasn't Square a product of that $1.5 billion of investment? And I think this is where the changing dynamics of software-based competition really kick in, because it's no longer the case that a larger development team with more money and more spending equals innovation. And it's really the speed of iteration and your ability to empower agile teams that is differentiating your software value like never before. From a platform provider perspective, there's been a phase change in architecture that goes along with this next generation of developers, and they have really new values. And I think Netflix has delivered, again, another poignant example of this with their approach to continuous delivery and horizontal scalability. They've also standardized their service binding and discovery. Mobile is a first-class citizen. And finally, in addition to just delivering interactive web features, all of these companies have a deep sense of analytics that they wrap around this to measure themselves during their iteration cycles. And I think at a larger perspective, that's what makes Pivotal such a unique company, because not only are we focused on a next-generation software platform, we've also wrapped a deep analytics story that we can get into in another time around all of that. The problem, though, as we see it, as we can confront enterprise conversations today, is a lot of enterprises are not organized for software agility. A lot of their app deployment processes look just like this today. So a developer has to make its way through a maze of IT gates in order to deploy software or to iterate on software. And that's why really I think Paul Graham's smaller, more iterative and agile approach has been disruptive in the market, because a lot of existing IT spending goes into just keeping the trains running on time and applications available, and less to iteration and innovation. This has now become obvious, and this is what was hinted at, a few years ago, is now obvious to even large enterprises. And the exciting part about the launch of Pivotal CF has been to see the level of engagement we've had. I mean, just yesterday, 2 critical conversations with very large companies looking to build a whole net new platform. And the reason they're looking to do that is they realize that they can't compete anymore. And companies like IBM, Warner Music, and others have echoed this same response, saying that enterprises must learn to compete on the basis of software. And then the question becomes, how can they compete? What is the new infrastructure that they need? Warner Music in particular has answered back, that's Cloud Foundry. And they've come and spoken at our platform conference, and they've said, Cloud Foundry is our path forward for all 320 enterprise applications that we have. We've also seen really strong endorsements of this PaaS model from Cisco Systems. Recently, their CTO of collaboration published a blog that said that PaaS is the operating system for the cloud. And he also went on to endorse the open ecosystem and approach of Cloud Foundry, which is an open source project licensed with an Apache 2 provision. So we're thrilled to have that collaboration with Cisco. And we've also seen some echoing in the press recently that this is a must-have asset for every enterprise. InfoWorld has said that the single most important thing you can do this year is to enable your developers with a fast and flexible PaaS. And we think Pivotal CF is perfectly positioned to enable that. And I'd like to pass the baton to James Baer, who runs product management for the team, to give you a technical demo and to start to show you some of the features we think can really change how developers behave inside your enterprise.
Thanks, James. Let's transition to the demo screens. Today I'm going to focus on the end user surface area of the platform as a service. But before diving into that, I want to set a little bit of context and show how does the platform get there. And we're going to have a subsequent webinar where we'll spend more time on the operations aspects. But in the past, my background is using traditional middleware platforms, very much in the Java world. I've worked for IBM, BEA Systems, and Oracle, so using WebSphere and WebLogic and traditional middleware is something I'm very familiar with. And in the past, it's been very hard to establish those systems, install them, configure them. And that's something that Pivotal CF actually offers a very compelling, revolutionary piece of software called Operations Manager to do just that, to set up the PaaS. So as an example, here I have VMware vSphere, and if I drill in, you can see that there are just a couple of questions I have to answer about my vCenter environment. So basically, I'm going to tell Pivotal CF, here's my infrastructure as a service information. If I'm a vCenter administrator, it's very simple just to answer a few questions about the IP, the host, and the username and password of my vCenter environment. And from there, you see these tiles here. I have examples of the Elastic Runtime, which is our commercial edition of Cloud Foundry. And then you can see a MySQL environment. But if you see this Add New Product area, I can also add other products. So as an example, here's RabbitMQ. So this is really as simple as adding tiles and then clicking this install button over here, and it automatically deploys the platform as a service to your infrastructure as a service. Today we support VMware vSphere, and that's what I'll be demoing on today. But we also are adding the same experience for Amazon Web Services, OpenStack, and we even have some of the newer clouds coming out like Google Compute Engine. It's a very pluggable interface for us to add infrastructures as a service. So with that, let me transition over to the developer user experience. So this is a web console that visualizes what I want to demonstrate today. In the top right here you see, for a little bit of context, I can have multiple organizations. An organization might be a cost center, or it might be some kind of self-organizing team that empowers developers to get together and collaborate on an application. And within an organization, you can have multiple things that we call spaces. A spaces is what you might think of as an environment. So here I have development, staging, and production. I'm going to focus on the development aspects today, but transitioning these applications from the development environment into a staging or a production environment is a one-click operation. It's very simple and straightforward to do. So let's take a look. I have two applications running here. This one is a Spring application, which I'm going to demonstrate in a moment, and this is a Ruby application. And we also have a database. And one of the things that Cloud Foundry allows you to do is mix and match the applications and services together in a very pluggable way. So let's drop into the developer experience for adding an application to the platform and see what that's like. So if you look at the application here, it's a very traditional Spring web application that uses a database. And there's nothing special about that. It's any other kinds of applications and services, whether you're using messaging systems, databases, Spring, Java, and I've also shown you Node.js and Sinatra can be pushed from Ruby. We support a whole pluggable framework for languages and frameworks that can be put on the platform as a service. This is not just a Java application server, for example. Pretty much anything you can run on a Linux environment, you can put on the platform as a service. So as a developer, I have a simple operation called cpush to send my source code into the system. And so what's going to happen is it's taking the source code from my finished asset, which is my application, and sending that into that development environment, that space that I showed you earlier. And what we're seeing right here is the platform has done a lot of things for me, just automatically. It's detected that my application is a Java application, and so it is downloading the latest secured version of Java that's blessed by my organization. It is downloading and configuring Tomcat for me. It looks at my services for my applications. If I bind other services like a database or an APM solution like New Relic to my application, the build pack infrastructure has the ability to configure those services so that my application knows where to find the connection information and the credentials to use those services. All of that happens with that simple operation. And with that, you can see at the end, the application has its host name and it's up and running. So this is a very simple Spring web application that's backed by a database, and it's an example of a multi-tier application. What you're seeing here is I've gone through a load balancer and configured that with a special DNS entry for my application. I have gone to the application server, which is running the latest version of Tomcat, the latest version of Java, and connected to my database. And then if you look down here, we can actually go see the logs for this application as well. So I'm going to connect into this application and stream the logs back to my client as a developer. In the past, it's been very difficult to correlate all of the logs for an application in one place. So if we just refresh the screen a few times here, what you see if you go back to my browser and then come back to the terminal you'll see the logs streaming out of my application. These are log entries that come from the load balancer and from all the instances of my application. And that's a really powerful construct because in the past, you might have had to go into several machines to aggregate that information together. We aggregate all the logs and the API information about your application in a single stream, and that stream can then be forwarded through a standard logging protocol called syslog to remote services such as a Splunk or some kind of thing that your application might use in your organization. But that's available out of the box as the platform. So now that we have our application there, that's great. You push a single instance of an application, you might say, how can I scale this up? So scaling is the same simple primitive if you want to interface with the application. As a developer, I have complete control over that. So let's take this other application I showed you, the basic Sinatra application, and I'm going to scale that application up. And I'm going to give it 20 instances. So while I'm doing that, let's go see the logs for that application. Logs, basic Sinatra. Great, there it is. It says I'm connected, so let's go back to this console and look at the Sinatra application. And I can dive into that and see now that I have 20 instances of that application up and running, and I get the statistics out about basic statistics about my memory, CPU, and disk. So if I go visit that, you can see here that as I refresh, all 20 of these instances are being load balanced dynamically in real time. I don't have to file a support ticket with the network team to poke a new hole in the firewall for a new machine or configure the load balancer in a special way. Those features are just inherently enabled as part of the platform out of the box because we have this dynamic routing tier. And going back to the log screen again, you can see that as I've been hitting all those different endpoints that are being routed to different application instances, all of those logs are streaming back to my single developer console. So with that, that's the basic end user experience that I wanted to show you as part of the demo. And you can see that being able to push an application into this platform in a development environment, and that same experience that I just showed you, I can move that application into a staging or production environment, and I don't have to change the configuration. It's that same CF push because these services are bound to the application, and they can dynamically at runtime find out their connection metadata information through a service binding, and the applications can be promoted from one environment to another very simply. So Rakuten, a global internet service company, has used this platform to showcase to their developers the dramatic productivity gains they can have from using this kind of approach. And they actually measured their developer productivity and spoke about it at our platform conference last September. If you look at the traditional experience that they had as developers, they measured it, and they looked at what happened when a developer had to onboard an application onto their existing platform. And they had to go through multiple phases of a business process to get that involving ticketing, and the developer actually left the process as they filed a ticket, and then it was in other people's hands. And the developer was kind of not empowered to move things along throughout the process. 8 manual steps, and developers are out of the workflow. Similarly, Intel measured their onboarding process as well, and they found that it could take them up to 140 days to land a new application onto their platform using their pre-existing processes. And they found that after moving from that traditional platform process of involving multiple steps, multiple stakeholders, ticketing systems, that they could move to a Cloud Foundry-based platform whereby they were targeting a cloud and simply pushing their application and empowering the developer at all the different phases of that to promote new versions of their code, to automatically handle things like load balancing DNS entries and retrieving their log files, and being able to scale their applications. And that level of empowerment It's pretty dramatic. You push your application and it just works across all of those different constructs and tiers. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into Cloud Foundry and Pivotal CF and see what's happening under their covers. So that push command you saw me execute earlier, it sends the source code of my application along with some metadata about the application into the platform. That application is then stored in a database, the metadata about my application, and then the source code that I've uploaded to the platform is stored in a blob store. When I create and bind services to my application, those services are associated with the application such that when my application is instantiated on these execution agents, as you see in the slide, that the connection information about those services is set as an environment variable to my application. That way my application can easily bind to new services dynamically and look in its environment variable for the connection information. When the application is deployed, I can scale it out across many of the execution agents, and voila. Now my application is distributed to many servers, and it's all been empowered by a single developer interface called CF Push, and the developer has a self-service API, which was before a ticketing process that involved a lot of other stakeholders and was outside of the developer's control. So Rakuten at Platform Conference said that this increased their productivity by 90% and by their measurements. This isn't a theoretical thing, they actually measured it. And they had an order of magnitude increase in their server to admin ratio by which they were able to administer the platform, which is also a big cost savings. So if you think about this must-have characteristics that James Waters spoke about earlier, you really want to have all of these characteristics that are listed. You want to be able to rapidly iterate as a developer, scale your application, and being able to continuously deliver software as new features and capabilities become available without having to go through an onerous process that may take days and weeks. You want to make that developer empowered. You want to have a standard way of interfacing with services. And Cloud Foundry and Pivotal CF empower that with this service binding interface, such that whether I'm talking about a relational database, a messaging system like RabbitMQ, or a big data platform like Pivotal HD based on Hadoop, that I can bind those applications and services together very quickly and deploy them. You want to be able to integrate with legacy services, and Cloud Foundry has the same construct with services that are native to the platform. I can connect to existing assets like a mainframe database or an MQ series by creating what's called a user-provided service, which is essentially a pointer to an existing service that's up and running in your enterprise. And those same connection informations that I showed with the services that are native to the platform can also be exposed to the applications for the services that are external to the platform. And that information, just like the regular services in Cloud Foundry, are exposed to my application through environment variables. And of course, that same interface that I showed you earlier for operators that can initially deploy the platform can actually scale the platform itself. So not only can I scale the individual application as a developer, but as an operator of the platform, I can scale from tens of machines to hundreds of machines when my business is ready to scale. So to summarize, you can target your choice of clouds. Today, what I showed you is Pivotal CF deployed on vSphere. We can also deploy Pivotal CF to Amazon Web Services and OpenStack environments. And the only change you have to make as an application developer is using the target command to change which cloud you're pointed at. Across Amazon Web Services, OpenStack, and vSphere, the application is the same. And underneath, Cloud Foundry Pivotal CF has taken care of the details of deploying to those different infrastructures as a service. As a developer, I just push my application and it just works across any of those clouds. I'm able to bind my application to any service that is available in the platform, including Hadoop, relational databases, messaging systems, and other services that you might bring to the platform, such as a mainframe database or an MQ series existing asset that you have in your enterprise, and it's very simple to scale your application. So with that, I want to just encourage you to go to Pivotal Network and download Pivotal CF. You can sign up for a technical briefing and get additional information about Pivotal CF and how it can help your organization. And we can talk more about how Pivotal is using the same practices that we're talking about empowering our customers with ourselves. So what you're going to see over the next several months is that not only are we talking about empowering your organizations with agile software practices and continuous delivery, we're practicing that with Pivotal CF itself. So we're on an approximately 10-week cadence of delivering Pivotal CF new features and capabilities to our customers. So we're not just stopping with 1.0. We're having a 1.1 and a 1.2 and a 1.3, and you'll see this on this regular cadence, which is really unprecedented in enterprise software, where a lot of times people are used to deploying a static platform and keeping it for years and years and years, and they're stuck with the features that they have. We're empowered now to continuously update the platform and deliver the platform continuously, as well as the applications that you can deploy to that platform. With that, I think I'll turn it over to questions in the chat and see if we have anything here from our panelists.
So we've been getting a lot of great questions, James, and I've been trying to fire off quickly answering them as we go.
Okay.
So Vic, are they able to do any audio, or is it just they're able to just chat?
It's just chat. So so I'm going to put the list of questions up here, and
yeah, so let's cover a couple questions. I think some folks were wondering what platforms were available on. So what clouds can they deploy? And I think it's important to understand that Cloud Foundry is fundamentally designed as a multi-cloud interface. And so we don't force you to compromise on choosing a cloud when you're choosing your architecture. So we support vSphere out of the box. We support AWS, we support OpenStack, and we have experimental support for GCE and for CloudStack. Those have all been implemented in the open source. But the commercial product today supports Amazon, OpenStack, and vSphere. And we do plan on having VCHS support, which is based on vCloud from VMware in the first half of 2014. And if you want to learn more about that, I put the email in the chat of Killian Murphy, who is our contact over at VMware and leading a beta for Pivotal CF on VCHS. Some of the other questions from here, just to highlight, is Daniel asked, I heard about Hadoop services based on CF. So James Bear, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what we have there?
Yeah, sure. And actually, maybe I'll just go back to this interface. I want to show this again so that we can address the question. We have a Pivotal HD tile for this interface, and you can actually download that. I'll just go to Pivotal Network right now and show you guys how easy it is to download that software. Not join. That's what you guys need to do. I already have an account on Pivotal Network, but Pivotal Network is where the one-stop shop to get all of the products from Pivotal. And as you see here, here's a Pivotal HD deployment, and I can just click there to say get product. And here's the download for Pivotal HD. So we have a full Hadoop platform that comes with all the services that Hadoop offers, including Zookeeper and HDFS and MapReduce, Hive, and plus the Pivotal additional thing that makes it incredibly valuable, Hawk, which is a SQL interface on top of Hadoop. So all of those services that are related to a big data Hadoop platform, you can get from this download and then plug into this interface right here. So once I download it, it's as simple as me going to this tile, importing that into this platform, clicking install, and literally minutes later, I have a full Hadoop platform deployed and available to Cloud Foundry.
Our best times right now are, under 5 minutes for an arbitrarily large Hadoop cluster, fully configured, ready to integrate into applications. And I think that's a future webinar that we'll do. I think you'll see that Cloud Foundry is going to be the best and leading way of deploying and managing Hadoop and integrating into your applications, which is important to that new phase of development where an analytics cycle has to be wrapped around your web interactivity.
James, do you want to talk a little bit more about OpenStack?
Yeah, so we have a premier partner. If you're thinking about Cloud Foundry and OpenStack together, we have a premier partner called Piston Cloud. Piston was founded by one of the founders of OpenStack from NASA, Josh McGindy, and they literally sit in our offices with us half of the week working on a very deep integration between Piston Cloud and Cloud Foundry. We have two large anchor users in the service provider space. One public one is Swisscom. Swisscom uses Cloud Foundry with OpenStack to deliver services to their customers right now in beta, and that's rolling out. So there is a great story of OpenStack and Cloud Foundry together. And the thing that's important to understand is it's not just that you can install Cloud Foundry and OpenStack, it's that Cloud Foundry and OpenStack are integrated at an API level. So Cloud Foundry automates OpenStack directly.
Here's a good one about futures, Hyper-V and Azure. Any?
If there's a customer need for Azure, that's the first time I've really heard of it. GE, who's our investor, has at least mentioned Azure to me before, but we haven't seen really, really strong customer demand for it. I've reached out to Patrick Chenazon, who used to work on Cloud Foundry, who's now an evangelist for Azure, to talk about this, but we haven't had an anchor customer to drive the integration yet. We're very open to it, so we'd be happy to move forward with it.
Here's a question, a related one. Is it Microsoft dev environments or Linux-based only?
James, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what you've seen today is a completely Linux-based cloud, but just yesterday, you might have heard of CenturyLink. They're one of the largest service providers in the United States. They were in our offices, and they've been working on something called Iron Foundry, which is a Cloud Foundry port of the application containers on Windows and supporting .NET. So we're collaborating with CenturyLink to work on .NET support formally and bringing it as a part of the project. It is something we are not supporting yet today in the commercial product, but we have intentions of exploring that and trying to do that in 2014.
Here's a good question from A. Patel about running on the private cloud. We obviously run there, but what kind of support, James, can we talk about for multi-tenancy? What type of tenancy options when you host it in your own data center or on a provider?
Sure. Well, one of the things, we have a partner with VMware, obviously, who's a big investor in Pivotal and was a big sponsor of Cloud Foundry, is they have a new offering called the vCloud Hybrid Services. And with vCloud Hybrid Services, you'd be able to run a Cloud Foundry instance in your own data centers, and then also in the public cloud using the same tools that you might use in the VMware family of products, so that you could have a Pivotal CF instance on-premises as well as off-premises in VMware data centers, and have those the same developer experience, the same ability to scale, whether you're on a private cloud running VMware in your data center or running vCloud Hybrid Services in a VMware data center. So that's something, a collaboration we've had very closely with VMware. They're helping us every single day on the project, and they work with us. So you'll see more tighter integrations with VMware vCloud services as well.
Yeah, and we do support vSphere. So if you have, the one call to action I would say is if you have some vSphere capacity, you can have Cloud Foundry up and running today, doing all of the demos that James did on the webinar. And I'd challenge the audience, if they're interested, to try it and give us feedback.
Here's a great one from Ross Johnson. As a developer, what do I gain from using Pivotal Cloud Foundry or Pivotal CS for enterprise development that I don't get from AWS?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me about AWS is the difference in the portability of your application. So a lot of the services that AWS provides are very API-centric to AWS and are not portable to other contexts. So what you saw me do as a developer was just push my Java application into the platform, and that included a dynamic load balancer, dynamic logging, and binding services to my application. When you do that using AWS APIs, you're tied to the AWS infrastructure, such as Elastic Load Balancer for load balancing. You're tied to their way of provisioning virtual machines, which is EC2, which is not necessarily compatible with other infrastructures as a service. If you look at tying into other aspects of their platform, like their blob store, their S3 APIs, you're very much stuck in that Amazon-only context. One of the things that's really powerful about Cloud Foundry is it's a neutral layer above infrastructure as a service, So whether you're running on your laptop or whether you're running on vSphere or OpenStack or AWS or Google Compute Engine, you have the ability to move your applications into the same developer interface. So it really helps you avoid the lock-in. And when you have new, especially now that Google Compute Engine is out, I think you're going to see a lot of competition in that space. And as Google might have, let's say, faster virtual machines or better networking or whatever characteristic that developers might want to use, if you bet huge on Amazon and tie yourself all the way into their APIs, you won't have the flexibility to try out other contexts.
Yeah, I mean, just to share some real-time feedback from enterprises in the field, we had a great win yesterday at a company that was looking for a new platform. They said, hey, we're selecting Pivotal CF as that platform. And they said, frankly, look, we baked you off against Salesforce and Force.com, and you were not proprietary, you were multi-cloud, you were open source, and you gave us more than one hosting option, and you could support large-scale data. We looked at you against Amazon only, and we thought that bare IaaS was both not immediately enabling of developer productivity, so it's very hard to do that drag and drop deployment that you see with Cloud Foundry, and also the lock-in that you talked to. Go to Google App Engine, and they said, sorry, there's no ecosystem there, and again, same problem as Force.com, we're locked into just one instance. So I do think that there will be a second generation of cloud where infrastructure service alone is not sufficient and where portability is required. When Amazon was kind of like the monolith and the only game in town, it might have been more feasible to make that bet. And I think, as you said, James, you have to keep your cloud options open these days.
Here's a good one. Several attendees have asked this question about support for our own Gemfire product and real-time data integration, real-time memory grids.
It's absolutely on the roadmap for this year, and R&D is ongoing on that, and one of the highest priority things we're delivering.
I actually have an exciting update that the Gemfire XD is a new beta offering of Gemfire that's integrated with our big data products at Pivotal, is expected to be part of the Pivotal HD tile at the end of January in the 1.1 release.
Oh, fantastic.
So just one of these tiles that will show up here on Pivotal CF should have a Gemfire service available to bind to your applications. So keep an eye on Pivotal Network for those updates. And you can, if you go to Pivotal Network, you can subscribe to product updates and get a notice when that support is available.
Yeah. Maybe one thing, Vic, is we were thinking about doing operational and architectural characteristics of this as our next webinar, talking about operating it and installing it. You know, any quick show of hands from folks that are remaining on the call, if a deeper dive into architecture of Cloud Foundry and operating and installing it might be of interest, maybe just pipe up on the chat box while we're waiting for any other questions.
Yeah, that's great. Here's another one, competitive question from Steve Fan. Can you please compare Pivotal CF with OpenShift?
Yeah, I mean, I think OpenShift's one that we don't see a lot. Actually, I think we tend to see Amazon or a lot of focus on Amazon or, do-it-yourself PaaS. I've not seen OpenShift in the market yet. I know that they're out there. I think that one thing that is really different about Cloud Foundry, though, is that it is natively integrated into the IaaS. So we truly automate the cloud for you. We're not just a layer that you put on top. And so we can do things like also then deploying large-scale Hadoop services, large-scale Cassandra services. And I've also heard some feedback from some private consultants at Cloud Credo regarding OpenShift that they couldn't get it to scale given its architecture. And so some of the demos that James gave where you scale up to 20 instances instantly, you immediately get logging out of it, you bind that all to a URL with a few simple commands, that they couldn't work there. And I'd say that it's really, I think, prima facie obvious right now that Cloud Foundry has a superior ecosystem to OpenShift. If you look at IBM, at NTT, at Intel, at SAP, at Swisscom, at Orange, at Symantec, at the litany of companies that have all signed up to contribute to Cloud Foundry. Who else, James?
Verizon.
Verizon has chosen us as their PaaS.
NTT.
NTT. And there's really too many that I can't remember now. They've all said, hey, Cloud Foundry is the leading ecosystem and the best architecture, and they've all done bake-offs. So, I mean, all respect to the Red Hat guys. I think they're a very interesting brand, but I haven't heard much from that product.
Here's one that I apologize if I mispronounce this. Puya Arvandian. He's asked this several times. I think we owe him a response. Are we targeting only larger-sized corporations, or do you have plans that fit the budgets of smaller startups as well? Maybe our Pivotal Web Services.
Yeah, so I think one thing we want to do this year, and if I were to ding us on something, just very frankly, is that this last year we focused a lot on shipping an enterprise product. And I think Pivotal CF is the leading enterprise PaaS bar none, and we've seen 8-figure checks coming our way in accordance with that. So I think that was the right strategy. But this year we're going to fund a lot more folks in R&D to deliver a SaaS-based experience for Pivotal CF that I think would be ideal for developers. We already do have our Pivotal Web Services at run.pivotal.io, and we've got a marketplace of other services that you can buy into that on Amazon, so I'd encourage them to check that out. And we're doing a really compelling price there. It's only 3 cents per gigabyte hour, which is actually cheaper than running on Amazon yourself. So stay tuned for our SaaS experience. That's an area we can improve.
That's great. Yeah, and I think that Puya's follow-on was what's the advantage versus Heroku, and I think you mentioned price.
Well, I think A is that you can actually get the software behind us and take it to other clouds. You can get it, upcoming on Verizon. We're in conversations with other major service providers. You can get it on an NTT. You can get it on Swisscom. So you can get it anywhere you want. And B is that we're running it to prove how efficient we are on Amazon, and we're basically running it at a very aggressive price to put a lot of load on the system. So I think that the price is 1/5 of Heroku as an example, as one really killer point, and portability.
So here's a contrarian question from Salil Deshpande. We support everything, sort of philosophically, lowers credibility. Can you talk about some things we don't and won't support maybe on our roadmap?
14 methods of Bosch, right? We don't.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So people ask us, how do you support multiple infrastructures? What's behind that? How do I take Cloud Foundry and deploy it on Amazon, or deploy it on OpenStack, or deploy it on VMware? The reason we are able to do that is we stick to a very small set of primitive APIs, about 14 of them. There are things like create virtual machine, create a network, create a disk binding for the persistent disk to bind to that virtual machine. And there are about 14 of those APIs. And so some of the very sticky features of Amazon Web Services, or native features that people add on and above those basic APIs, we're not supporting in our platform directly. We believe that sticking to those very core 14 APIs is a good way for us to get exceptional portability on top of those bare constructs. So that would be one thing. The other thing I would mention is that whenever you have a distributed scalable platform, we have made some opinionated design decisions around that. So some things like using persistent disk and network file systems as a part of your application. If your application requires a lot of persistent disk and shared disk between things, Cloud Foundry is opinionated, and it says that those types of integrations should be in a service. And it should not be at your application tier, that tier should be stateless. And so that's an example of one of the things that we've taken a kind of an architectural principled stand on, because we believe that that's the way you get to a scalable platform. And that's something that if you look at a lot of the very well-regarded cloud architectures, for example, from Netflix, it's something that they've embraced, and when they've deployed on Amazon Web Services, they're a famous customer of Amazon. That design pattern has proven itself out in many well-known scenarios, and I think it's the right choice.
Yeah, we do have an opinionated architecture underneath the covers, and I think the thesis from our CEO, Paul Moritz, is not that somehow Amazon will be a monolith. It's that clouds are the new servers, and that so fundamentally, you didn't write to an HP server. You wrote to the standards that were existed between all servers, and I think that's what we're trying to do with clouds.
Here's a great question we get often from customers from Nick Ross. So what's kind of the relationship between our open source upstream on GitHub and Pivotal CF, and what's the value we're bringing to customers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things that you'll find when you go to GitHub, this is an open source project, and it has many contributors now. We have a very long list of contributors from IBM, and just this week we had Symantec and Orange join the contributors list. So you can go to cloudfoundry.org and see the open source project and all the people participating. But it's a very fast-moving code base, involves a lot of different people working in the code base, and it moves very quickly. So if you're trying to consume the open source software, you've got to do some investment to stay up with the pace. And it's a little bit of a harder getting started experience than what we've shown here today. What we've done for the commercial product, we made it extremely simple to download everything you need in one large file, being able to import that into vCenter as a virtual appliance and automatically deploy that over tens or hundreds of virtual machines. That kind of curated, very simple experience, one download, couple of questions to answer and deploy, and automatically update that. That's the experience, the difference between the open source and the commercial product, which is it's a little bit more curated. You get commercial support from Pivotal. We also have this web console that you're seeing here from developers. That is something that is only available in the commercial product. And same thing with this very curated installer experience there. We have additional integrations coming for other capabilities for management and monitoring. That's where our partners like IBM that are helping us develop Cloud Foundry, we're all going to innovate around the edges for management and monitoring capabilities that are unique to our platforms. And so there will be some differentiation in that layer, and Pivotal CF has already started to do that today.
Here's a somewhat related, interesting question that we also get from Ray Clearwater, and I think you can talk a little bit, James, about the operations and productivity for IT professionals. What adoption obstacles do you see with large IT organizations, traditional IT infrastructure like control and job security? So what are we bringing to IT pros to?
Well, that's a great question. So one of the things that we are trying to put controls in place. So if you look, I have an organization here that I talked about earlier, and those organizations can have things called quotas. Quotas could limit my organization to a certain amount of resources in terms of memory or disk, or restrict the amount of types of applications I can deploy. So we are empowering some level of control to IT if they want to impose it on the developers. Out of the box, we believe that developer empowerment is a very important thing. So we have a very nice developer self-service API out of the box. But all of the events that developers are doing are being audited and logged for the traditional IT compliance to knowing who did what, when, if they're allowed to do it. And we're taking in a lot of enterprise feedback to make sure that we have the right balance between self-service developer productivity and meeting all the compliance needs of a modern enterprise. It's something that I really believe differentiates Cloud Foundry from a lot of the other application development and automation technologies, is that we're built as an enterprise PaaS from the ground up. So all those capabilities I showed you earlier around pushing my application, scaling it, changing it in some way, those are all being logged and audited. And that's something that's really important to enterprise IT that we've talked to.
And here's a follow-on from Nick. Great question. You guys have a white paper on security. We're working on that one. But I think the more interesting question is the standards that enterprises have to harden and control at the OS instance layer. We're doing some interesting things with stem cells. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So Vic used this term called a stem cell. A stem cell in Cloud Foundry, Bosch is our automation and deployment technology that's behind Pivotal CF. A stem cell is very generically an image that has the bare minimum you need to be an operating system. When it wakes up, it phones home to the basically Pivotal CF operations manager and says, "I'm here. What software do you want to put on me?" And that stem cell today is one that we distribute, and we are working with enterprises to be able to enable other scenarios, like to allow them to put agents and allow them to build the stem cell. Those kinds of capabilities on the roadmap. Today, you get the one that we distribute, and it's a very hardened, secured stem cell that has all the security updates applied. When new Linux kinds of vulnerabilities come out in the Linux kernel or other kind of Linux utilities, we distribute new versions of the stem cell, and it's a single download and update process, and you get a zero downtime update in your cloud when you apply those updates. So that's one thing we're certainly working on, is how to empower enterprises with their own base images, and how to automate that in a zero downtime way when you deploy those updates.
Great. Here's another great one from Mike Bailey. What's the relationship, or how does CF interact with policy and governance and tools like BCAC?
Okay.
Or we have good integrations with things like Service Mesh as well.
Yeah, I think so. We've seen demand for two things primarily: for VCAC from VMware, which we're working on integrations there. They'll be available in the first half of 2014, I suspect. And also Service Mesh is another big partner there that's popular around policy and governance. And there's actually a full-time Service Mesh engineer who sits at our headquarters and who's been working on integrations there, and I'd be happy to give demos to folks if they're interested. I've put my email out there personally. If people are interested in follow-ups on this, happy to coordinate it. That's jwaters, WATTERS, @gopivotal.com. And Vic, you can post that again into the chat to make sure people have it if they want to follow up around Service Mesh or VCAC.
Cool. Another one from Steve Fan on designing for large-scale projects, multi-tenancy in mind. I have a huge project, more than 30 apps, all deployed to CF, and they all need to share data. What's the architectural approach?
So when you have a very large project that has a lot of distributed components, I think it comes down to the teams themselves, and that's how what I've seen here even operate as we build Cloud Foundry. We break down into smaller teams that it can be more agile. One of the things that Amazon likes to talk about in the way they develop Amazon Web Services and some of their internal tools is they talk about a two-pizza team, right? If your team's getting larger than enough to be fed by two pizzas, then you probably need to break it up into a smaller team. And so Cloud Foundry enables that really well with these organizations and spaces concepts. And you can organize your teams into those kinds of concepts, and being able to coordinate across teams, giving each team the empowerment over the assets that they produce, whether that's an application or a service. Services are, the native services are scoped to a space, but the thing that I talked about earlier, if I want to share a data service across spaces, that's no problem because we support the user-provided services context. And so with that example, I can have 6, 10, 15 different teams all using the same database, for example, or the same messaging system. That would be just fine. Every situation is going to be different, but Cloud Foundry's organizations and spaces, the way that we empower self-organizing teams, and the way that each team can have their own production environment, that in that production environment share services, is how we would address a very large project like that.
Cool. Here's a great question. Folks that are on AWS, this is from Omar Yakar. What is the level of effort to port from an app in an AWS that has been integrated with AWS APIs?
Well, I think it depends on the nature of the AWS APIs that you're using. One of the things I think you'll find with Cloud Foundry is some of the things that Amazon uses just go away. For example, you don't have the Elastic Load Balancer. Cloud Foundry and Pivotal CF have a dynamic updating load balancer built into the platform. It's not something that you have to rely on Amazon to have for you. And so in the past, that's been a very big difference between something that's been developed on-premise where you have a load balancer like F5 or Zeus or whatever kind of networking equipment you have in-house, and then when you go to Amazon Web Services, you have this thing called Elastic Load Balancer, and it's configured a different way and with a different process. With Cloud Foundry, you have this routing tier, and you don't have to rely on those kinds of infrastructure needs. The platform inherently just brings it for you. There are some other things from Amazon that we offer as well, such as the RDS is a way of quickly empowering developers with databases on demand, and we can quickly do that here. So I'll just give you an example of how easy it is for me to add a MySQL database. So I just click on the option here. I'm going to get a 100 megabyte MySQL database, and I can bind it to an application or not bind it to an application. In this case, I'm going to say not to bind. And just like that, in literally moments, I have a brand new MySQL database that's available to me. And so even some of the data services that Amazon are offering, we can offer inherently in the platform. And there are some constructs such as S3, which Amazon does a very good job of doing a scalable distributed blob store across regions. So some of those capabilities you might still want to leverage for long-term storage or for very safe data storage itself. But we are also partnering with EMC and VMware to bring other very scalable, privately available data storage solutions to market that are S3 compatible.
Great.
I love, Vic, that there's still 300 people hanging out asking questions now 30 minutes into Q&A, so thanks everybody. This is really fun.
So, if an attendee didn't get their question answered, I think they can hit James Waters directly or James Baer with a question. We'd be happy to continue to engage with you offline. So, I'll send both their emails here in the chat window.
Yeah, I've been spamming them with my email a bit, so they probably got that, Vic.
Okay. And
there's no suggestions for next month's topic, which means we're just going to pick. So I think we'll probably maybe do ops.
Yeah, I think operations manager would be really exciting for people to see how we can take a very large distributed system, whether that's Hadoop or whether that's Cloud Foundry or whether that's something else that you might want to deploy, and make it as simple as what it looks like on an enterprise app store. It's a tile where you answer a few basic questions, you say install or deploy, and it automatically goes out and does that. And you have the ability to manage and monitor that with zero downtime. So I think that would be really exciting, James, if we focus on that next time.
Yeah, and I started my day-to-day with a conversation with the CTO of CloudBees, where they do a Jenkins service, and we're working on getting their Jenkins enterprise service into this Pivotal Network interface.
Oh, great.
So there's also going to be a whole ecosystem of distributed partner applications that are large scale that you could never import and easily work with before that come into Pivotal Network, and that'll be fun to show up too. So maybe we'll do a webinar with them someday demoing that.
Yeah. The other thing I'd mentioned, there are a lot of great attendee questions, like they want a deeper dive, double click on the architecture. We have a briefing also. So shameless plug here from the marketing guy, bit.ly/PCF_briefing. Go there, sign up, and one of our awesome Pivotal field engineers will get in touch with you for a technical overview and briefing.
Yeah, and just feel free to follow up with all of us. We're here to help. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. I mean, great to have hundreds of people come out for the first installment of this, so I think that's a really positive sign. We'll keep them going. Send us your questions or suggestions for the next series, and encourage you all to be an important part of the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. It's an exciting place to be right now. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, James.